I'm out here at the day of my son's funeral, and my phone buzzes with a number I don't recognize. A woman's voice, barely holding together, says, "Mr. Whitfield, I found something in his desk. You need to come to the hospital right now, before your daughter-in-law gets here." Then she adds something that stops my heart cold. "And please, don't tell Marcus's wife I called you." When I walked into that office an hour later and saw what was sitting on the desk waiting for me, I understood my son hadn't died the way everyone told me he did. If this is your first time here, welcome, family. Stories like this one are why I started this channel, so stick with me to the end because I promise you, this one is going to surprise you. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from today. If you believe family should always come before greed, hit that like button right now. And if you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and fix that, because trust me, you don't want to miss where this story ends up. My name is Walter Whitfield. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a floor supervisor at a furniture manufacturing plant outside Greensboro, North Carolina, and I raised one son, Marcus, mostly on my own after his mother passed when he was 14. Everything I'm about to tell you, I lived through with my own two eyes, and some of it still doesn't feel real to me, even now, sitting here telling it to you. Marcus was 36 years old when he died. He was a good boy, always had been, the kind of son who called me every Sunday evening just to talk about nothing, in particular, football scores, whatever was going on at the plant, whether I'd been eating right since my knee surgery. He worked as a senior claims adjuster for Palmetto Regional Insurance, a company with a tall glass building downtown on Elm Street, and he'd been there almost 11 years, working his way up from an entry-level desk job to a corner office with his name on the door. He was proud of that office. He used to send me pictures of the view. He'd married a woman named Renee about 5 years back. Pretty, sharp-dressed, the kind of woman who always had somewhere important to be. I won't lie to you and say I loved her like a daughter, because I didn't, not really, but I loved my son, and my son loved her, so I kept my mouth shut, and I showed up to every holiday dinner with a smile on my face. The funeral was on a Thursday, the last week of March, out at Cedar Grove Memorial, off Highway 29. It was one of those cold, bright mornings where the sun is out, but it doesn't warm anything, and I remember standing in the front row in the same navy suit I'd worn to bury my wife 18 years earlier, looking at a casket that held my only child, and I kept waiting for my legs to give out from under me. They never did. I don't know if that's strength or just shock. The official story, the one the police gave us, was that Marcus had died in a single-car accident on Route 421, late on a Tuesday night, 10 days before the funeral. They said he lost control on a wet curve, went off the road into a drainage culvert, and the impact killed him. No other vehicles involved. No witnesses. The report called it an accident, plain and simple, and I believed it, because why in God's name would I question it? My son wasn't reckless. He didn't drink. But accidents happen to careful men too. That's what everybody kept telling me, and I let myself believe it because the alternative was a hole I wasn't ready to look into. About 60 people came to the service. Coworkers from the insurance company, our neighbors from the street I'd lived on for 30 years, my brother Elton driving up from Columbia. Renee sat in the front pew beside her sister, dressed sharp as always, dabbing at her eyes with a folded tissue that never seemed to get used up. And sitting 2 seats down from her was a man named Corey Vance, Marcus's business partner in a side venture. The two of them had started 2 years back. Some kind of investment consulting outfit. They ran evenings and weekends out of a rented office space. I noticed Corey kept his phone in his lap through most of the service, glancing down at it every few minutes. And every time he did, Renee would lean over slightly, like she was reading it too. At exactly 10:47 that morning, right as the funeral director was inviting people up to say their final words, my phone buzzed hard against my leg. I almost let it go to voicemail out of respect, but something made me look at the screen first. It was a number I didn't know, a local area code. I stepped back out of the pew as quiet as I could and walked toward the vestibule, my heart already starting to climb. "Mr. Whitfield?" The woman's voice was shaking. "My name is Denise Coker. I worked with your son at Palmetto Regional. I need you to hear me out before you say anything to anyone." "What is this about?" I asked her, keeping my voice down low, the organ music still playing soft behind the door I'd just come through. "I found something in Marcus's desk," she said. "Something he left for you specifically. I've been trying to figure out how to get it to you without going through Renee, and I don't have much time to explain why over the phone. Can you come to the office this afternoon? I get off at 1. And Mr. Whitfield, please, I'm asking you not to mention this call to your daughter-in-law. Not yet. I think you could be in real danger if she finds out I reached you first. My hand went cold around that phone. Danger from what? Please, she said. Just come. I'll explain everything when you get here. I need to back up and tell you something about my family, because none of what happens next is going to make sense otherwise. Marcus had done well for himself. Between his salary at Palmetto Regional and whatever that side investment business with Corey brought in, he and Renee lived comfortably. A four-bedroom house out in the Adams Farm neighborhood, two newer cars in the driveway, vacations to places I'd never been able to afford to take his mother. I never asked too many questions about the money. It wasn't my business, and Marcus always seemed happy, or at least he told me he was, every Sunday on the phone. About 8 months before he died, Marcus mentioned to me, almost in passing, that he and Corey had a disagreement over how the investment business was being run. He didn't give me details. He just said Corey had been pushing to bring in new investors faster than Marcus was comfortable with, cutting corners on the paperwork, promising returns Marcus didn't think they could actually deliver. I might have to walk away from it, he told me one Sunday. Corey's playing a game I don't want any part of. I told him to trust his gut. He usually did. Then, about 6 weeks before he died, Marcus called me at an odd hour, nearly 10 at night, which he never did. He sounded tired in a way I hadn't heard from him before. He said he'd found some things in the business account records that didn't add up, money moving in and out that he couldn't explain, and that he was starting to think Corey had been doing something with client funds that Marcus's own name was attached to, whether he liked it or not. I might need a lawyer, Dad, he said. I think I'm in over my head on something I didn't sign up for. I asked him if Renee knew. He got quiet for a second and said, Renee thinks I'm overreacting. She says Corey's been good to us, and I should just let him handle the business side of things like always. That was the last real conversation we had. 10 days later, he was dead on Route 421. 3 days before the accident, Marcus texted me a photo of some folder full of what looked like bank statements. No explanation, just the picture and the words, might need this someday. Love you, Dad. I remember staring at it, confused, and typing back, What's this? He never answered. I figured he'd explain when he called on Sunday like always. Sunday never came. The morning he died, according to what Renee told everyone, Marcus had left the house around 9 at night, saying he needed to clear his head and was going for a drive, something he apparently did sometimes when work stress got to be too much. Nobody saw the crash happen. A trucker found the wreckage around midnight and called it in. By the time I got the call from the state trooper, my son had already been gone for hours. And there wasn't a single thing left for me to do but drive down to identify him and start planning a funeral I never in my life imagined I'd be planning. Standing in that church vestibule, with Denise Coker's voice shaking in my ear, everything came rushing back at once. The late-night phone call, the photo of bank statements, he never explained. The way Renee always seemed to know exactly what Corey Vance was thinking before he said it out loud. Denise, please, just tell me what you found, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Not on the phone, Mr. Whitfield. I need you to see it yourself. Come to the office, and whatever you do, please don't say a word to Renee or to Corey Vance. If what I think happened actually happened, I don't know what either of them is capable of, and neither should you. Not until we've got real proof in front of us. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped the phone, getting it back into my jacket pocket. I walked back into the service, sat through the last 20 minutes without hearing one word the pastor said, and when everyone started filing out toward the burial site, I told my brother Elton I had some paperwork with the funeral home I needed to sort out, and that I'd meet everyone back at the house afterward for the reception. Elton offered to come with me. I told him no, I needed to do this one alone. Renee didn't even seem to notice me slip away. She was standing near the parking lot with Corey Vance, the two of them talking low with their heads close together, and just before I turned to walk to my truck, I watched Corey reach out and rest his hand flat against the small of her back for just a second, the kind of touch a man doesn't put on his business partner's grieving widow. Then he pulled it back quick, like he remembered where he was. I got into my truck, an old gray Silverado with more miles on it than I care to admit, and I drove downtown toward Palmetto Regional Insurance on Elm Street, with my son's casket still fresh in the ground behind me. No idea at all that the hardest part of that day hadn't even started yet. The Palmetto Regional Building took up 6 floors of glass and steel downtown, the kind of building Marcus used to point out to me with real pride every time we drove past it together. I parked in the visitor deck a little after 1 o'clock, still in my funeral suit, my collar loosened, my mind running through every possibility of what a woman I'd never met could be about to show me. The security guard at the front desk, an older fellow named Gerald, recognized my last name off my ID and waved me through without much fuss, said Marcus used to talk about his dad all the time. Denise Coker met me by the elevator bank on the fourth floor. She was maybe 50, tired-looking, dressed plain, the kind of woman who does her job quietly for 30 years and never asks for recognition. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying on and off all morning. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading me down a hallway past a row of cubicles, most of them empty since it was the middle of the day. "I've worked 2 desks down from your son for almost 9 years. He was a good man, Mr. Whitfield. One of the only genuinely honest people in this building, and that's exactly why I think this happened to him." "Why? What happened to him?" I asked, my chest tightening. She stopped at a small break room, empty, and shut the door behind us before she answered. "About 2 weeks ago, Marcus asked me to help him pull some old file records, client account histories, tied to that outside investment business he ran with Corey Vance. He told me he'd found irregularities, and he wanted a second set of eyes he could trust, someone who wasn't connected to Corey at all. We spent 2 lunch hours going through spreadsheets together. What we found, Mr. Whitfield, it wasn't a mistake. It was theft. Corey had been quietly moving client investment money into accounts that traced back to properties he and Renee had been buying together over the last year and a half." My stomach dropped straight through the floor. "Renee?" Denise nodded slowly. "There's a condo down at Wrightsville Beach, purchased 11 months ago, title held under an LLC with both their names buried in the paperwork. Marcus found it by accident, going through a wire transfer that didn't match anything in the official books. He was going to report it. He told me he had a meeting scheduled with the State Insurance Commission the following week, and 2 days before that meeting, he asked me to hold on to a copy of everything, just in case, and told me if anything ever happened to him, I was to get it to you, and only you, in person." I felt the floor tilt under me. He knew something might happen to him? "I don't think he wanted to believe it," Denise said quietly. "But yes, Mr. Whitfield. I think, deep down, he was afraid." She led me back to her own desk and pulled a plain manila envelope from her bottom drawer, Marcus's handwriting across the front. "For my father. Only him." Inside was a folded letter and a small USB drive taped to the back page. My hands shook so badly opening that letter I had to set it down on the desk twice before I could read it straight. In it, Marcus wrote that he discovered Corey had been running what he called a Ponzi-style pattern with new client money, using fresh investments to quietly cover older shortfalls while skimming a steady stream into real estate purchases nobody in the actual books knew about. He wrote that when he confronted Corey privately about it, Corey had laughed it off at first, then gotten cold and serious, warning him that pulling on that thread would hurt more people than just the two of them, meaning Renee. He wrote that Renee had known about the condo the whole time, had helped pick it out, and that when he brought his concerns home to her, she'd told him to let it go, that Corey had taken care of them for years, and Marcus shouldn't ruin a good thing over paperwork technicalities. He wrote that, the week before, he'd started noticing his car had been serviced by someone he hadn't taken it to, that the brake fluid reservoir looked different than he remembered, and that he probably sounded paranoid writing it down, but he wanted it on record just in case. "There's more on the drive," Denise said softly. "Sit down, Mr. Whitfield. I think you need to." She plugged the drive into her computer and turned the screen toward me. The first folder held financial spreadsheets Marcus had built himself, tracking every questionable transfer over an 18-month period. Nearly $400,000 moved out of client escrow accounts and into properties connected to Corey, through that buried LLC paperwork to Renee as well. The second folder held photographs Marcus had taken of his own car's undercarriage, dated the week before he died, comparing them against older maintenance photos, with his own handwritten notes flagging a brake line that looked freshly worked on despite no service appointment on record. The third folder was the one that stopped my heart completely. It was a screenshot of a text conversation pulled from a shared family cloud account Marcus and Renee used for photos, a conversation between Renee and a contact saved only as C, dated 4 days before Marcus died. Renee had written, "He's not going to let this go. He's already talked to someone at the commission. We need this handled before he says anything else." The reply from C read, "I'll take care of it." Route 421 at night. Nobody questions a bad curve in the rain. Just make sure he's the one driving that night, not you. I sat there in that break room staring at that screen, feeling something come apart inside my chest that I still don't have the right words for. Denise put her hand on my shoulder and told me that Marcus had come to her specifically because he was terrified that if anything happened to him, Corey and Renee would control the story before I ever learned the truth, and he wanted to make absolutely sure that couldn't happen. He protected you, even at the end, Denise said quietly. Now it's on us to finish what he started. I asked her why she'd warned me to keep this from Renee specifically. She looked at me steady and said, if what that message implied was true, then Renee and Corey were capable of a lot more than moving money around on paper. And if they found out this evidence existed and that I had it, there was no telling what they'd do to keep it buried, especially with Marcus's life insurance policy and his half of that investment business now sitting there for Renee to inherit clean. We need proof strong enough to bring to actual investigators, Denise said, not just suspicion. That evening, Denise called a man she knew, a retired state investigator named Roy Pemberton who did private consulting work now. Roy met us at a diner off Wendover Avenue within the hour. A broad-shouldered man in his 60s with a slow, careful way of talking that made you feel like he was weighing every word before he said it. He read through everything on that drive twice without saying a word, then finally looked up and said the thing none of us wanted to hear. This is enough to reopen a case, Roy said. It is not, on its own, enough to convict anybody of murder. We need the state crime lab to look at whatever's left of that vehicle before it gets scrapped. We need a forensic accountant on those financial records officially, not just what your son put together himself. And Walter, if you're willing, I'd like a wire on you for a conversation or two, because people like this, sooner or later, they get comfortable enough to talk. I sat in that diner booth, my son 9 days in the ground, being asked to walk back into my daughter-in-law's life and act like a grieving father, with no idea what she and her business partner had done, all while wearing a wire under my shirt. It was the hardest thing anybody had ever asked me to do. I said yes before Roy even finished the sentence, because Marcus had trusted me with the truth, and I was not about to let that trust go to waste. Roy got the wire situation arranged through a contact still working at the sheriff's department the following week, an old friend willing to quietly reopen the file based on what we'd handed over. I kept showing up to family dinners at Renee's house every Sunday like always, sitting across the table from the woman who I now believed had helped plan my son's death, nodding along while she talked about how hard this had all been on her, how she didn't know if she'd ever feel normal again. Every night after those dinners, I sat in my truck in her driveway and just shook for a while before I could make myself drive home. It took 19 days. 19 days of forcing down dinner across that table, watching Corey Vance come around more and more often, always with some excuse about helping Renee sort through Marcus's business affairs. On the 19th night, Corey stayed late after Renee sent me home early, claiming she had a headache, and Roy's contact, still parked 2 streets over monitoring the wire I'd worn earlier that same day when I'd pressed Renee gently about selling the investment business, had already caught something useful, Renee mentioning offhand that Corey's got the title work finalized on the beach place. We just need to wait a respectable amount of time before anybody notices the timeline. But it was 6 days later, at a smaller dinner with just the 3 of us, that we got what Roy called the piece that closes the whole case. I'd pushed, gently, wearing the wire again, asking Renee if she ever wondered whether Marcus's accident really was just an accident, watching her face for anything. She got sharp with me, told me not to torture myself with conspiracy theories, that some things just happen and I needed to accept it and move forward. Then Corey, sitting right there at the table, said the words that ended everything. Walter, I get it. Losing a son messes with your head. But trust me, that road's a death trap in the rain. I told him myself once, that curve's going to catch somebody someday who isn't paying attention. He said it smooth, almost gentle, and I felt every hair on my arm stand straight up, because Marcus died on a night with no rain in the forecast at all, something the original accident report never once mentioned, and something Corey Vance had no earthly reason to know unless he'd been out there himself. Roy had that recording pulled and cross-referenced with Weather Service data within 2 days. Combined with a fresh forensic review of the wrecked vehicle, still sitting in a state impound lot, which turned up evidence of a deliberately compromised brake line consistent with the photos Marcus had taken himself, and Denise's financial records, now backed by a forensic accountant's official report, Roy told me we finally had what he called an airtight case. Now we bring it into the open, Walter, he said. On our terms, not theirs. We decided to move the same week Renee had scheduled a meeting with Marcus's life insurance company to begin the payout process, At the office of the family attorney who'd handled Marcus's estate for years, a man named Gordon Blackwell on Battleground Avenue. Renee and Corey had no idea that Roy Pemberton would be sitting quietly in the office next door, or that two sheriff's detectives would be parked outside in an unmarked sedan waiting on his signal. I spent that whole week acting exactly the way I had for 19 days straight. Quiet, grieving, cooperative, letting Renee believe everything was moving along, just the way she and Corey needed it to. She even hugged me the morning of that meeting, told me she was proud of how I was holding myself together. I stood there and let her arms wrap around me, thinking about those words on that screen. I'll take care of it, and feeling nothing in my chest but cold, steady patience. We all sat down in Gordon Blackwell's office at 11 that morning. Renee in a charcoal dress, composed and calm. Corey beside her in a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month at the plant, both of them clearly expecting a routine formality before the insurance payout cleared. Gordon went through the standard opening, and then, right on cue, he looked over at me and asked if there was anything I wanted to say before we went any further. As a matter of fact, there is, I said, and I watched something flicker across Corey's face, the first crack in that smooth composure. Before this goes one step further, I think everybody in this room needs to hear what my son left behind for me. I nodded toward the door, and Roy Pemberton walked in carrying a laptop, followed by Denise Coker and two sheriff's detectives, whose badges Corey Vance recognized instantly, because the blood drained clean out of his face before either of them said a word. Renee's voice came out sharp and fast. "Walter, what is this? What's going on?" I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Marcus is what's going on." Marcus never really left, Renee. He made sure of that. Roy set the laptop on the table and played that recording without any introduction at all. Corey Vance's own voice filled that quiet office, talking about a death trap curve on a road with no rain in the forecast. Words that meant nothing to anybody in that room except the four of us who understood exactly what they proved. The room went dead silent except for that recording, playing through, every single word, landing like a hammer coming down. Corey's face went pale, then something close to gray, and he stood up so fast his chair nearly tipped backward. That doesn't prove anything. That's completely out of context. "Sit down, sir," one of the detectives said, stepping forward and showing his badge for the first time. "You're both going to want to hear the rest of this, and everything either of you says from here forward can and will be used against you. Financial fraud, falsifying investment records, and an active investigation into vehicular tampering related to the death of Marcus Whitfield." Renee hadn't said a single word yet. She just sat there, staring at the table in front of her, and I watched something break loose in my daughter-in-law's face. Not innocence, because that had been gone a long time before this room, but the specific look of a woman, finally understanding. There was nowhere left for her to run to. "Walter," she said, voice cracking apart. "I didn't know he was actually going to do it. I swear to you, I never thought Corey would actually go through with it. I just wanted him to stop asking questions. That's all. I wanted him to stop before he ruined everything we'd built." I felt Denise's hand land steady on my shoulder, grounding me, because for one full second the whole room tilted sideways and all I could see was my boy's face the last time I hugged him at Christmas. But I didn't shout. I didn't need to. "My son sat across from you every single night of your marriage, trusting you with everything he had," I said quietly, "and you sat there counting down the days until you didn't have to pretend anymore." The detectives took them both out within a few minutes of each other. Renee cried the entire way to the car. Corey never said another word. It's been almost 10 months now since that morning in Gordon Blackwell's office. Corey Vance was convicted of first-degree murder for the brake tampering, along with multiple counts of securities fraud, and he's currently serving a life sentence at Caledonia Correctional. Renee's case went to trial separately. The jury found her guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and financial fraud, and she's serving 22 years, with the judge specifically noting at sentencing that her knowledge and silence made her every bit as responsible as the man who cut that brake line. I still live in the same house I raised Marcus in, out on Whitmore Street. Some evenings the quiet in that house still nearly breaks me in half, and other evenings it just feels honest, like the truth finally has room to sit still. I got what was left of Marcus's half of that investment business, back through the courts, every dollar the state could trace and recover. But I want to tell you something, family. The money was never what any of this was about. Not for one single second. Denise Coker and I still have coffee together most Sunday mornings now. An unlikely friendship neither one of us ever expected. And she tells me things about Marcus I never knew. How he used to keep a photo of me and his mother taped inside his desk drawer where nobody else could see it. How he talked about retiring early someday and moving closer to me. I set up a scholarship in Marcus's name at his old high school for kids studying accounting and finance. The kind of quiet, careful work he was always so good at. The kind of work that, in the end, was exactly what saved the truth and brought it home to me. I think about that church vestibule a lot, Denise's voice shaking on the other end of that phone, asking me to come see something before it was too late for it to matter. My son protected me one last time, from beyond wherever he is now, and I intend to spend every year I've got left making sure that protection meant something. If this story touched you today, go ahead and hit that like button, leave me a comment, and tell me your thoughts. And if you want more real stories like this one, subscribe and stay close, family. I'll see you in the next one.